This is an entire visual effects course slammed into one YouTube video. We're going to be exploring the basics of how you make visual effects, and not just any visual effects, but invisible visual effects. We'll be working through several examples from our recent short film, Delivered.
No. Don't do this to me!
This is about a girl who gets into trouble and then her trouble gets into trouble. And it has a bunch of visual effects, which hopefully you didn't really notice. And I'm going to show you exactly how we did that over the next couple hours. The first thing you got to do is download the media. You can click right here or in the first line of the description. That gives you all of the high quality, ungraded HD media. You can download that and throw that into Resolve, and it's for the entire film. So you can practice whatever visual effects you want. You can practice color and color management and all the stuff that is pretty important to know in Resolve. And you can get that totally free.
All right.
And follow along and learn even better than you would if you just watch this, okay? So make sure to do that. That's your job. Click that link. I'll wait. Okay, we're going to dive into how to do these invisible visual effects. I'm going to take things as slow as I can. I am going to explain some of the basics of how visual effects work, but I am going to assume that you know a little bit about how nodes work and how Fusion works. I do have a lot of videos on that. So if this is your first time ever using Fusion, I'd recommend starting with more of a basic video, as we're going to be talking about some crazy cool concepts. Let's get started. When you download the footage, you're going to get 3 zip files: Delivered HQ Part 1, Part 2, and VFX Assets. Unzip each of these. You could just right click, and I would recommend using a utility like 7-zip on Windows or the Unarchiver on Mac, and just extract the files. And that should put these in various folders. You can throw these all into one folder if you want to, it doesn't really matter. What you should end up with after you unzip those files is a big list of MOV files, as well as an audiomix.mov. Grab all of this and drag that in like that. Now we have all of the clips here in our media pool. I'm just going to select the first clip and shift select the last clip and right click on the first clip and say create new timeline using selected clips. Boom. Create. That's going to put all of these clips on the timeline in the right order. Take the audio mix, drag that down below, and guess what? We have the whole movie, and it's all split up into individual shots, which you can color grade, you can work with, you can composite, whatever you want to do. Couple things that I will do to this project is I'll go down to the project settings cog right here, and I'm going to change a couple things. For timeline resolution, instead of 1920 by 1080, I'm going to do 1920 by 720. That's because we have this widescreen anamorphic footage, and when it's properly scaled, it's only 720 pixels high because it's, squeezed. So we'll do that. The other thing we'll do is go to color management. And here where it says Color Science DaVinci YRGB, I'm going to switch this to DaVinci YRGB Color Managed, like that. I'm going to uncheck Automatic Color Management. And then here under Color Processing Mode, I'm going to select HDR DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. Okay, that's going to set up our color management so that we're not looking at log footage while we're compositing, or even while, normally while we would be editing, that kind of thing. So we have our timeline resolution set. We have our color management set. I'm going to hit save, and that's going to get rid of the black bars on top of our footage here. The one other thing we have to do to make sure our color management is working is select all of our clips, right click on them, and go down to input color space, and we're going to select Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5. Listen, this is the color space that you need. Every time we do a video like this, people are like, what's the color space? This is it. Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5. That's what you want for all of this footage. Okay? It happens every time. That's all. So pay attention. Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5. And then look what happens. Everything looks better now. Okay? It's pretty dark, actually. This is a very dark movie. And most of the shots. That's where color comes in. Some of these shots are a little bit brighter like this. A lot of them are pretty dark, pretty low key like this. The other thing I'm going to do is go up here to my bin list here, right click and make a new bin. And we'll just call this VFX Assets like that. Right click and let's import media. And when you unzip the VFX assets.zip, you should have a few files like this. Bring those in there just so we're ready. The other thing we're going to do is make a new bin, and we'll call this Action VFX. Our friends over at Action VFX were so kind in providing some assets for you to use at home and for me to use in this course. And when you sign up to get the media, you should have a link to go to their site and download these files. Once you download them and put them in a folder, select them and import them into a bin called Action VFX, just like this. Once you have everything set like that, then you're good to go. You're set up to follow along. And again, I highly recommend following along. Make sure to click the link down below. Get the files. It's totally free. Okay. And so we're pretty much set up. Now I'm actually going to open up a project that I had because I have these little markers here just to remind me the shots that I want to go over, but it's the exact same setup. Whew. We're all set up. Let's take a sip of coffee. And let's talk about a few visual effects concepts. We'll just do a little overview of some of these concepts just so that you're not completely lost if we start talking about them. So there are a bunch of elements for visual effects, but these are the ones that are, I think, most important for invisible visual effects. So that means that you're adding things to a shot, you're changing things around, you're adjusting the image, and the point is that nobody notices. So it's not like you're adding a huge explosion or a 3D spaceship or lasers or anything like that. That's all visual effects, but they're kind of like in your face. This stuff should look like nobody really touched this. There's nothing obvious going on. It just looks like what the camera captured. So one of the big concepts is tracking. So when you have a shot with a shaky camera or a camera that's moving, or even if it's panning or tilting or whatever, if there's any kind of movement for a camera, when you put something over it that's not moving, that's a dead giveaway because you have this kind of mismatch of images. And so if we were to do something like add fog back here, that would work fine if the camera was completely still. But if the camera's, shaking up and down and left and right, we want this fog to shake up and down and left and right with it. We need it to match the movement. That's called match moving, matching the movement. And the way that we do that is we'll use software to pick out parts in the shot that will be moving in the same direction and speed and amount as whatever we're trying to kind of put into that scene. And so if this camera is moving up and down and left and right, then these elements are also going to move up and down and left and right. And so we use a tracker to kind of figure out where each element is on every frame. And that's going to give us some data, and that's going to allow us to move, fog or rain or whatever we want to do in the exact same way that the camera moves. Okay. So that's the concept of tracking. That's probably one of the biggest giveaways if you've added a visual effect is if it doesn't actually match the movement of the camera. Okay. So we have to nail that. We have to get that good. Okay. So let's take a look at one of our shots here. So in your edit at about 1 minute and 41 seconds, this shot 19, this is what it looks like. It's a shot out of the car window and where we can kind of see outside in the darkness. It's always important to realize what things should look like in the context of the movie. Now, this shot isn't bad. There's nothing really wrong with it if you just look at this shot. But if you look at it in the context of the movie, it's supposed to be pouring rain. It's supposed to be really rainy. And so part of this movie was shot in the rain, and part of it was shot when it was actually really nice outside. Sometimes we used a hose or a sprinkler to make kind of fake rain that you could see a little bit better. And sometimes, like on this shot, which was shot at like 1 a.m, where we were totally tired and didn't want to set anything up, we just kind of shot willy-nilly without the rain. Not only that, but this is supposed to be through a closed window. So there's supposed to be a window here. So yeah, this is a great shot, except for 1, the window's down, and 2, there's no rain. So we can fix that with visual effects. And if we do a good job, it'll just look like it's raining outside. But if I play this back, you'll notice that even though it's slight, this shot is moving. It's moving a little bit. So there's just a little bit of shaky camera. This whole thing was shot kind of with a shaky camera look because it helps it feel a little bit more in the moment, a little bit more wild. It is sort of a traumatic kind of movie. And so that's why we have the shaky camera. But when we do have a shaky camera, we have to deal with the movement, which means that we have to track it. So whatever we do to make it look like there's a window here needs to match that movement. So in order to do that, let's go into Fusion. So I'll just click on Fusion with that shot set up. And essentially what we're going to do is take some footage of water on a window and just kind of paste it over this. And that's going to fix the problem of not being a window and it being raining kind of in one fell swoop, I think is how they say it. I always want to say a foul swoop, but it's not. It's a fell swoop. I think it's a logging thing. I don't know. Anywho, in our Action VFX folder, we have a few assets. I'll just make this a little bigger. So we have some blood splatter. We have some rain, all kinds. But we also got this condensed glass. So let's take this and drag this in. And we'll call this condensed glass MI for media in. This media in is going to be OG footage underscore MI. And we'll put this over the original footage like that. So we have this kind of rain on black. And the idea here is that we can take this merge and go over to the apply mode and switch this from normal to something like screen. And what that will do is kind of take away the black and leave the white. And so it's almost like you're looking through a dark window with that condensed stuff on it. So it looks like there's a window there in some ways, except for, again, the dead giveaway is that this is moving, the other one's not. So let's fix that problem. I'm going to close our media pool and bring up two viewers here. So we'll take our original footage on the left and our final comp here on the right. We're going to take this original footage and we're going to track it. There are a bunch of ways that you can track, which we're probably going to explore a few of those during this video. But I think the easiest, most wonderful way is the planar tracker. So to bring up a planar tracker, I'm going to select this original footage and hit Shift Spacebar. That's going to bring up our Select Tool panel. And I can just type in what I want. And I just want a planar tracker. Make sure to hit planar tracker, not planar transform. I'll hit Add. And this should have put it in here, but I can grab it and hold Shift and just drag this onto that connection. And now this is connected. With that planar tracker selected, I'll bring that into this first viewer here. I'm just going to kind of select these trees. Now, this isn't going to be exactly right, but I think it's going to work for this shot. Generally, if there's parallax, you don't want to select the background. You'd want to select the foreground where this glass would actually be. But these move somewhat together, and I think we're going to get away with it because there's really not a whole lot to track on this kind of blurry foreground. There just isn't a lot to track here. So we're going to try this. In fact, I might even include this part here because it's a little bit higher contrast. And what this is doing is this is selecting just an area that I want to automatically put a whole bunch of tracking points on. And then we're going to track the movement, and it's going to kind of average it out and give us an animation that will let us match that movement. So over here in the inspector, under here where it says motion type, instead of perspective, I think I'm just going to do translation and rotation. And I'll set my reference time, which happens to be at 82 frames. It doesn't really matter where it is. And then we'll track forward. Good. And then we'll go back to our reference time and track backward like this. So all of these little green things are the little indications that it's trying to track a point. So it's tracked a whole bunch of points. I mean, gosh, a couple hundred points at least. And what it's doing is it's figuring out that movement. And we can test this out to see if it did a good job by just going here to operation mode. Instead of track, just say steady. What that's going to do is apply kind of the reverse motion from this tracker to this footage. And so let's just look at it. Let's just play it back. This should be pretty darn stable. It shouldn't really move. So it is like just a little bit, but it's nothing noticeable. See how much the edges are moving? That's okay. It's reversing that image, and all we have is just kind of the trees moving a little bit, which is fine, but it's not moving around like this. It's steady compared to before, which is very much not steady. Okay. So if we have a steady result when we go to operation mode steady, that means that our track is pretty good. So I'll switch this back to track, and you can do this a couple ways. You can either put the elements into the planar tracker and have it match move with that. But what I like to do is go here to where it says create planar transform and click that. That's going to give us a transform node. And this transform node has all of the movement animated onto it. So basically whatever you run through this transform node is going to move just like that planar tracker wants. Okay. So it's kind of like a separate handle that kind of moves things around. So what we can do is take this condensed glass and push this through the planar transform. So we have the condensed glass We're putting it through a planar transform, which moves that just like our shot. See how it's kind of moving around? Great. And then we're putting this over our shot with that merge. Okay. So that's what's happening over here. So now if we play this back, you see, we're kind of getting there, right? There isn't a big change in movement. It doesn't look super weird for this to be over it. It's not an obvious overlay. Okay. So we're getting there. Now there is another problem. Let's just look at this for a second. You tell me what this problem is. So it looks like the movement is good. Everything's fine. But we do have an issue here. The issue is that if this actually were a window, the window frame ends like right here. And, you know, like right around here. This is where the window frame is. And so that's the only place where the glass is going to be. We're not going to see condensed glass back here or up here or up here or even on this little corner right there. So what we need to do is limit this to be just where it's supposed to be. We're basically cutting out an area on screen for this glass element. That brings us back to our elements of invisible visual effects. Namely, masks and mats. This is an insanely important concept. And it's basically the idea that if you have an image on screen, you can cut it out and you can decide where you want to put it over other things. You can crop things. You can cut it out with a path. That's kind of masking. A matte is sort of like the result of a mask. So this black and white image, this would be a matte. A matte is just an image that's black and white, and the white tells something to be fully on, fully opaque, fully strong, and the black turns it off or makes it transparent. And so to cut something out, like cutting out our girl here, we could do this a couple different ways. We could draw a path around her with the pen tool, like this, and use that to cut out the image. Or we can generate or use an image like this that's black and white that controls where she is drawn and where she's not. We'll get into a little bit more about mats here in a second, but for a mask, all we have to do is kind of just trace around where we want this to be. So here in Fusion, what we're going to do is make a mask, but we're going to apply the mask to the merge. We can apply a mask a bunch of different places, but the reason we want to apply it to the merge is because we want to control where this window shows up on our final comp. We don't necessarily want to cut out the window first and then put it there. We want to put everything down and then just kind of decide where it's on and where it's off. This will make a little bit more sense here in a second. Our masks in Fusion live right here, and this one is our polygon mask. This is really cool. So I can take this polygon mask down, take the output of it, and plug it into the blue input of this merge. Now, when you plug something into a blue input, you're telling that node to only do that node's job where you put the mask, only in one section of the screen. So we have this polygon attached to this blue part. And now if I mouse over the screen, I have this crosshair. That means that I'm in draw mode. Up here, this little pen tool is selected in our little toolbar. That means that I can decide where I want to put this glass. And so here I have this little shape, and it only draws the glass within the shape. Okay. So I'll just get rid of that, and I'm going to put this exactly where it's supposed to be. And let's just say it's right there in that black, and then right here, and something like this. Okay. We'll just close that path. And now we have this glass only showing up where it's supposed to. So it's not over this part or this part or this part, right? So that's pretty good, but there's a problem. Watch this. As I play this back, look at this edge. This edge is being weird. Why is it being weird? Well, the reason is we haven't applied our match move, our tracking, to this mask. The mask just stays where it's at. Okay. So that's another advantage of using this planar transform. I can copy this, paste it, and I'll plug this polygon into the yellow input of the planar transform. By default, if you put this into a planar transform, sometimes it'll put it into the blue input. You don't want to do that. Just put it into the yellow input like this, and then take the output of the planar transform and put that into the blue input like this. And now look what happens. Oh, it's magic. Okay, that's great. So now we have this in the right place. Now there is a little bit of movement there, but I don't think anybody's going to notice. Especially because we're going to take this polygon and we're going to soften it just a little bit. Really, we want the edge of this to be about the same softness as this foreground image, which is pretty darn soft. So we'll just soften that a little bit. Okay. And that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Other thing I want to do with this polygon is I'm going to go over here where it says right click for shape animation. I'm going to right click there and say remove polygon 1 polyline. You can't quite see that. Right click here, remove polygon 1 polyline like this. Bloop. That's going to turn off the animation for this mask so we don't accidentally animate it. We might want to animate it at some point, but we want to be really intentional about it. So I'm just turning off the automatic animation. Okay. So now as we play this back, oh baby, it's looking good. There's another thing that's kind of a giveaway here. Let's see if you can spot it. What looks weird about this? There's something that's not quite right. Think about this. The leaves on the tree are relatively sharp. Everything kind of in the background is pretty sharp. The foreground stuff is fuzzy. It's fuzzy. The depth of field here is not very big. And so we have a very fuzzy foreground. If this window is supposed to be the same distance from us as this window frame, then this water, these drips and everything, should be blurry. So let's fix that. That brings us back to another element of invisible visual effects. Visual effects. Sharpness. If you want something to not be noticeable, you have to match the sharpness, right? So if we were going to put something by this door, it needs to be as blurry as the door is. If we're going to put something by Gwen back here and put sunglasses on her, right? Those sunglasses need to be the same blur amount as she is. You have to match that kind of blurriness, that focus. So we can do this in a few different ways. If you have the free version of Resolve, you can just grab this blur, drag that in like this, and push up the blur size, and it does a pretty good job. It does a pretty good job. It's better than nothing, okay? The problem is that when you blur this, it just kind of makes it fuzzy. It doesn't really give it the same quality that you would get if you actually had something in camera that was defocused, right? So what I like to do is use an effect that's only, unfortunately, in the paid version of Resolve called Lens Blur. Lens Blur is fan-freaking-tastic. Look at the difference here. Look at the difference in this blur versus the blur that we had. This blur has this bokeh that looks beautiful, freaking beautiful, okay? What we want to do is match the blurriness that would really be made by our lens and make this as like pretty much the same as we can. To do that, let's do a little bit of detective work here.
Yeah, just let me look around here.
Let's find something where we can really see that blur a little bit better. Okay, here's a shot. When we look at blurry stuff in the background, you notice a couple things. One is we do have that bokeh like this, these little kind of circles that show up, but there's also something about these circles, and you can really see it right here. It's not a perfect circle like this. It's not a hexagon. It is a oval that looks like that. And there's even qualities that are more detailed than that, but for us, let's just keep it close enough to that, okay? It's an oval shape that looks sort of like this with our lens. That's because this is an anamorphic lens, which squeezes the image in a way that produces that kind of bokeh. That's one of the reasons why we like anamorphic lenses. Back to our shot here, let's take this lens blur and make that look like that oval, all right? The way that we can do that is I'll just change this aperture shape to octagon. That's going to give us a little bit more sides. I'm going to push the blade curvature up, and that's going to make this a circle. In fact, you could probably even just do a hexagon, and yeah, it's pretty much the same thing, but whatever. Octagon, blade curvature all the way up. That's going to give us a circle. And then what's going to change the squeeze of it is by changing this anamorphism like this. See, we can kind of move this back and forth, and look at this. As we get down here, that's looking familiar. That's looking like what we want. And actually, if you were technical, the kind of lens that we shot with squeezes the image 1.5 times. So you would think that you want to set your anamorphism to 1.5. But what's going to happen is that's going to unsqueeze it. That's going to stretch it out. And so what we really want is 1 divided by 1.5, which, if you do the quick maths, is about 0.667. Boom. And look at that. We get this oval bokeh. Oh boy. Oh boy. And now it's a matter of matching the blur size. So let's just take this blur size down and we're going to push this up until it feels about right. Might not be, yeah, maybe something along those lines. Okay. So we have a little bit of blur on this thing. And now this is feeling a lot better. A lot better. There's one other factor that will really sell this. So let's return to the elements of invisible VFX. And that has to do with color management and color matching. Long story short, if you're going to put two images together, their colors need to match. You can't have one that's really low contrast and one that's really high contrast. You can't have one that is really bright and the other one's really dark, because nobody's ever going to believe that. And so for this shot with the window, it's cool, but this part is just a little bit off. It feels unnatural. Like, why would there be this bright white glare on this window when there isn't a bright white glare here, or here, or here, or even really on the background at all? And so we need to kind of just fit this in. One thing that's already helping us a lot is color management. So we have this footage that is Rec. 709 footage. It has kind of normal contrast, normal saturation. It looks like what you would expect just like a photo to look like. We have our original footage, which when we're looking at it through color management looks right, but without the color management, this would be really flat looking because this is shot in log. So Fusion is doing a lot of stuff kind of behind the scenes for us, where it's converting this log footage to look kind of normal, and it's taking this normal footage and it's mixing them together, and we don't have, this huge mountain of impossibilities to climb when it comes to matching these together. We just need to tweak it a little bit. So one thing that we can do is just to color correct this to be not so bright white. So I'm going to take this condensed glass up a little bit, and before my lens blur, I'm going to add some color correction. Now, I'm doing this before the blur just because you generally want to color correct stuff as close to the original image as you can in Fusion, just because when you color correct stuff kind of down the line here, after the lens blur or after the planar transform, not all the time, but sometimes some tricky things can happen. And there's not really any reason not to put this up here. And so we're going to have less problems putting this before the other effects with no real downside. So that's why we kind of put it there. And so I'm just going to take this color corrector. I'm just going to push this master and just push this a little bit more kind of cyan look. Like, oh, that already looks so much better. So much better. So here's before and here's after. And so it really kind of pushes it into that blue moonlight sort of feel. And so we're already just doing so great. But the last part of this, the part that's really going to sell this, believe it or not, is so simple. So simple. We're going to take this merge and we're just going to take this blend and push the blend down. You don't have to have every layer that you put on top of something be full strength. In fact, most of the time, subtle is much better. So we can take this all the way down, and it's almost like we've forgotten how clean this image looked without it, right? And so we can push just a little bit in here, and a little bit goes a long way. So like right here, this is looking pretty reasonable, and this is only at 25%, right? And much less just crazy, right? So, I mean, we might even do just a little more just for the sake of noticing it, 39%, something like that. And now this is a lot more believable. We can be just a little bit more picky with kind of how this looks, like the exact style of it. So for instance, this condensed glass, this whole frame looks like this, but we might just want to use part of this. We might want to maybe just use this upper part. Because this is going to be blurry, we can scale this up and it's not really going to matter too much. And so let's do this right before our planar transform. If you put two transforms together, it ends up being a little bit higher quality. Whereas if I were to put this transform before the lens blur or something like that, it's going to essentially sample the image twice. And so to keep the highest quality, we're going to keep these transforms next to each other. I'm doing the transform before the planar transform because I don't want to mess with the movement that's being put in here from the match move. I want to set it up just right and then have the match move take it. Okay, so we're going to take this transform and I'll just push the size up a little bit. And let's kind of move this down like this. Yeah, so we get just a little bit more of that. We're going to need to adjust our lens blur a little bit. So I'll just take this down just a touch, somewhere in there. So now we have a much better looking shot. Oh, that looks so good. Oh, so awesome. Pretty easy, right?
Heck yes!
So for this shot, we used our elements of invisible VFX to make sure this looks nice. Starting with our original footage, we tracked it to capture that motion, and we're applying that motion through the planar transforms, both for the foreground and the mask. We're taking our condensed glass, color correcting it to make it look a little bit more blue, adding some realistic lens blur, transforming it so that we're using the right part of it, adding the planar transform so that we get that camera shake, putting it over our original shot with our screen apply mode, and also blended this down to about 39%. Then we drew a mask. Then we applied this transform to the mask so that the mask moves along with the shaky footage as well. And we applied that mask to our merge, which limits where that window is drawn. And now we have a drippy window that looks much more realistic. And hopefully you'd watch that and you would never notice it, think about it, or know. All right, so that's that kind of shot. Let's take a look at something a little bit more complexicated. How about this shot right here? It's essentially kind of the similar thing, but let's kind of practice here in a scenario that just looks just a little different. By the way, this is at 5 minutes and 9 seconds. This is the shot that I'm working on. There are a couple shots that look like this, but this is the one I'm working on. I'm gonna unshow my page navigation just so I get a little bit of room. Again, let's kind of just remember the principles here. Let's just take a look at the shot. Great thing to do is just to take a look at the shot first. In fact, I'll even brighten this a little bit. We'll brighten it in color, but let's brighten this just so we can see what's going on a little bit easier with YouTube compression and all that junk. So I'm just brightening it way more than I probably would. So we have a shot of the monster eating a guy. It's totally fine. Everything's fine. And again, in context, it's supposed to be raining a lot. It's supposed to be pouring rain, and we didn't want to shoot in the rain. So we need to add rain to this shot. So much of my life the last few weeks has been adding rain. So much rain. Because it's less work than spraying a hose, isn't it? No, it's not. So let's pick some rain, which we actually have some nice assets from Action VFX again. And we have a couple things that we can use. We have the light rain medium. This is like a particle system, looks like. And then we have real rain, which, depending on what you're doing, may or may not be the best thing ever. Okay? So I think in this circumstance, we can probably just get away with this light rain. Let's just see how this works. And so we'll rename this rain _MI for media in. This is going to be OG _MI for original media in. And let's take the output of this rain and drag it on the output of our original footage. That'll make a merge. Rain's in the foreground. And let's take this merge and take the apply mode to screen. Now we're going to be adding rain like that. Yay. All right, job done. We're done, guys.
Job's done.
It's freaking raining. And so this is essentially the same kind of treatment as we're giving the window shot. We're adding an element with a screen, and we need to match the movement. We need to match the blurriness, and the sizing, and the colors, and the strength, all of that. So let's go ahead and just look at our original footage. And I think what I'll do is I will bring back that brightness and contrast and just push this up a little bit. I'm going to make this just a lot brighter than I probably would, because this is going to give a tracker a little bit more information to deal with. When everything's kind of crushed down, it doesn't quite have as much information, and the track tends to work better when you brighten stuff up a little bit for dark shots. So we'll do this, and let's make a planar tracker. And we're going to do kind of the same thing. And what I want to do is select everything except for the monster, because the monster is going to be moving around. And I think in this case, again, we're not going to have a lot of parallax between the foreground and the background. So let's just see how this goes. For motion type here, I'm going to select translation and rotation, set and track it forward. I think that's going to work just fine. go, track it backward. All right. So now we have this track. Again, we can test this out by saying steady. Let's just see if this, oops, we need to actually look at our planar tracker here. Let's just see how steady this looks. Looks pretty good to me. Looks pretty good. And you can actually see it is raining a little bit here. It's just not enough to actually show up on camera, which is sad. That's sad. So instead of doing the steady for our planar tracker, we're just going to go back to track and create planar transform. And at this point, we could take both of these out. I'm just holding shift to drag them out. And we can take this planar transform and we'll just run the rain through the planar transform. Now that rain is going to move along with our camera. So as it moves back and forth, the raindrops move back and forth. A little bit hard to tell with the raindrops. It's not really as essential that we have this tracked just because the rain's moving so fast. You'll just never really be able to tell too much. But sometimes it's sort of that subconscious sort of feeling you get when you look at something, you're like, it's not quite right. Okay, so we have the rain, it's tracked, and none of the edges are coming in and everything. That's good. That's because this rain is plenty big. This is 2K, which is a little bit wider and a lot taller than our frame. So it can stand to move around a little bit and not be a problem. Now we got to match a couple things here. One that's obvious is that these raindrops are way too bright, not blurry enough. So let's add a little bit of lens blur. This. Again, we're going to match our lens. So we're just octagon, blade curvature 1, anamorphism 0.667. Boop. There's our raindrops. That's a little much. So let's just take this blur size down. We just want them to be sort of subtle like that. There we go. Okay. I also think maybe we don't just go perfectly straight down. Let's make a transform. I'll just size this up a little bit, maybe a little more. Something like that, and then kind of turn this sideways like that, just a little. Just rotating that. And now we have quite a bit of rain happening. Okay. We want to make sure that's kind of that blue tint as well. So again, let's color correct this and just make a little bit more blue. Something like that. And we also only want the rain to be happening outside of the car, right? So again, we're going to take a mask. I'm going to right click for shape animation and remove polygon polyline. And let's plug this into the merge. And I'm just going to just mask kind of the inside here, just whatever's outside the door like that, and soften it a little bit. Bring this in, and then let's copy and paste this planar transform. Control C, Control V. So we want to plug it into the yellow input like that. Then we can kind of adjust our mask this. And there we go. We have a mask that moves along with our footage. So now we're getting there, right? That's looking a lot better. Let's take this merge and blend it down. We just want this to be barely noticeable, just so we can tell that it's raining without just it overly seeming like it's raining, right? There we go. There's some rain. There we go. That looks pretty good. The other thing we can do is add just a little bit of kind of haze, fog sort of stuff. And this is the similar idea. Let's just grab this second icon over, which is fast noise. Drag that down. We can do this a few different ways. We can either merge this into our main line as a separate layer, or we can just merge it with our rain before we put it here, and then we can just use the same mask. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I'll grab a merge and we'll just merge this together with the fast noise first. Here we go. And let's take up the detail in our fast noise. Just a reminder, the fast noise, what it does is it makes these kind of clouds. And so we can make this kind of cloudy shape like this. And then I'm going to actually just mask this fast noise to be just kind of, around the top like this, and just soften that. Just so we have a little bit of variety here. Just kind of filling this in a little bit, making a random little shape. Doesn't have to be anything. Yeah, something like that. Make sure this is really soft. And again, kind of same thing with this fast noise. We could go to the color and change the color to a little bit more cyan kind of look. bluish cyan, something like that. And what we're looking for is this to look almost good. And let's just play this back and make sure everything's working relatively well. And we do have a problem here. You can see that there's the edge of this fast noise. What's happening is this fast noise is actually an image, right? And it's being put over this other image and it's being cut off right there. So one thing that we could do would be just to take our fast noise and take our image size. Instead of auto resolution, I'll just push up the height a lot. So we'll just make this just bigger, something like that. We're going to need to adjust our mask now. And something cool is when you have a mask like this, you can go up here to this little shape box thing right here. And then that will give you a little transform box that you can play with. And we'll just resize this. We really should kind of check the size before we added the mask, but that's all right. You can always go back and change things. That's the beauty of it, right? Something like that. Great. Turn off the shape box. So now we have this moving back and forth, and we have that kind of static fog back there. Now, it's a little bit strong. So one thing I'll do is just take this merge and take the blend down a little bit. We'll just push this up just ever so slightly, just so we have a little bit, just a little bit of fog there. A little goes a long way. This is only at 27%. Good. Okay. And now I'll make this a little bit brighter just so you can see this next part. What we want to do is animate it a little bit. So seethe, when we push seethe, it kind of moves those clouds around, which we could animate this slider, or we can just push up the seethe rate, and that's going to automatically animate it. So we'll just push this up a little bit until it really kind of moves enough. Yeah. Maybe just a little less than that. You should just barely notice it. There's a little bit of seething. Great. Other thing I might do is animate the center. So we can take the center, push this sort of this way, keyframe it, and then at the end of the shot, we'll just move this over a touch. Just a little bit. Just so we have a little bit of movement. There we go. That looks so cool. Looks so cool. Okay. Again, this is a little bit too strong, and I also don't really want this over his head so much. So I might just take this up like that, and then take the blend down a little bit. So just so we have a little bit of fog there. I'm going to not animate this polygon though. Again, it's getting me in trouble. So I'm going to right click here where it says right click for shape animation and remove polygon. Just so we have it there, right where it's supposed to be. So now we have a little bit of fog, a little bit of atmosphere with our rain. Good. And that's all outside of the car. Now, depending on how crazy you want to get, you can even go, I mean, you could make multiple layers of rain if you wanted to. A way that you might do that would be just to take this rain, take another transform like this, just merge it over itself. We can just plug this blurry rain into another transform and then scale this up like this, kind of move it around. And then we have the other rain kind of behind it. We got to make sure this is on screen. There we go. So we have big rain in front, and then we have smaller rain in the back. We'll just change the angle a little bit, move that over, just so it looks different. So now we have a little bit more rain than we did. Cool, right? And when you hear the rain sounds and everything, you're never going to second guess that this is real rain, right? You can also mix this with stuff with other elements. You don't have to use just one element. Look at this. This is just a huge amount of rain. Okay. So this might be something that we want to put in the background as well. And heck, let's just put this all here and just merge this over like that. Again, with a screen. Let's take a look. Look at all that. Transform. We'll call this big rain underscore MI. I'm taking this transform and just scaling this up. And now if we look at our shot, it looks crazy. Crazy. Can position this rain. This is maybe just a little bit too big. Can position this rain to be maybe even back there if we wanted to. Let's just put this here for now. Maybe even just mask this rain a little bit. Soften it just so we get a little bit of fog kind of back there. So now we have just tons of rain, and some of it is going in front of him. It's not really that realistic. So to make this like perfectly realistic, it would be a good idea to trace him out so that we can put him kind of in a layer in between the rain, or we can just do something really cheap, like grab a mask and just have this only kind of over here, which is what I tend to do most of the time. Soften that a lot. And so now we get that same kind of feeling of that heavy rain right here without it being in front of him necessarily, right? So now, I mean, this looks like it's just pouring rain, which is really great. But yeah, it's pretty much all the same techniques, right? So we have our original footage, and I'll just bring this into our brightness. We brightened it up and tracked it. And then we took that track and we applied it to our rain. And we have several different elements of rain here. We have this kind of basic rain element, as well as our big rain like this. And those mixed all together with some fast noise, combined together and added with the tracking, and then put that over our footage and masking it correctly makes it look pretty cool. Makes it look pretty cool. Now, is this perfect? No, we should probably have, you know, the ground be wet and everything, but this is plenty of work, and it's good enough. And there's really a lot more that we can do on any of these shots, but you kind of get the idea. You can track something and have it move. You can mask it to make sure it's kind of behind other things, and then you adjust the colors and the transparency and the blur to make it kind of fit in that scene. Okay? Okay, we're going to take this up a notch. We're going to, believe it or not, we're going to add more rain, but this one is going to be a little bit trickier. So here's our shot, and I'm going to brighten this up just because it's underexposed anyway. It was just a little bit dark when we shot it. So I'm going to push this up a little bit. This is probably what we're going to be doing in color, but I'm just going to start with this brightened up. So we have just the brighter version of this. This is going to help with tracking as well as actually seeing things on YouTube. So for this shot, this is kind of the same problem. We have our girl parking the car, and she is looking at her phone and everything. But again, it's supposed to be raining. It's supposed to be raining, but it's not. We did wet down the windows, so that helps a lot. We have some drips on this window and everything. So right here looks pretty good. Right here looks good. There's a little bit of rain on the windows. So that part is believable. It's just not raining. So what we need to do is add some rain. But this isn't as easy as just replacing the window where we have static things, or looking out the door where we have the static door and the edge of the door. We have a person in front of it. And if we want water to be behind her, we're going to have to do some work and kind of combine that with all the things that we've learned so far. So as usual, a good starting place is to just track the shot. So I'll bring up the planar tracker, and I'm going to select pretty much everything but her because she's moving around. And we'll just kind of do something like this. Okay. And for motion type, again, probably translation, rotation, maybe rotation and scale. One of those is going to work. And I set my reference time and track forward, go to my reference time and track backward. There we go. And now if I go to steady, it should be steady. That track seems to work pretty well. I'm going to take this and create a planar transform and just drag this planar tracker out. I'll just keep it on the side here. So we have a planar transform. We need some rain. We can use either of these elements from Action VFX. For the film, I actually made some fake rain with a particle system. And so this is just a little bit, it's kind of the same idea, but it's just a little bit heavier rain, which I like this. And so these are just particles falling. If you guys want to learn about how to make something like this, let me know in the comments. I'll make a particles video. But so there's some rain. And so we'll use this as our rain this time. Rain MI. We'll run this through our planar transform and merge our planar transformed rain on top of everything with a screen. Schla. Okay. It's raining inside. Ha ha ha. So good. I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to grab the polygon mask, connect it to the merge, and let's take our planar transform and put that here. Let's put it into the planar transform like this. And this time, I'm going to make sure to undo my animation for my mask. This time, I'm going to draw around the opening of the window, but I'm going to kind of ignore her. And I'm just going to go where that window would be if she wasn't here. And we'll just kind of do a little path around the window like that. And so if she were a ghost, this is pretty much what it would look like. Something like this. Now, if my tracking and everything's working, this should stick to that edge. And it looks like it does pretty well. Doesn't look like there's much of a problem there. Again, this is because we have this planar transform, which is taking the movement of our camera and it's applying that movement to whatever we run through it. So both the rain as well as the mask. And those are both moving along with the movement of the shot. Okay. But how do we cut her out? If this were a still, we could just kind of do another mask and cut that out, but it's not. She's moving around. So we have a couple options. One is if you have the free version of Resolve, you can trace around her with a mask like this. And then for every frame, make sure that that mask is perfectly hugging her edges, just like that. If that sounds like a lot of work, it's because it is. It's miserable and annoying, and it's called rotoscoping. Some people who are crazy really like it.
I'm weird. I'm a weirdo.
That's not me. There are ways to do that in a smart way that makes it less miserable, by the way. If you guys want to learn about proper rotoscoping, we can do some videos on that, let me know. But luckily, if you have the studio version of Resolve, you have something called Magic Mask, which is perfect for this kind of purpose. So let's grab a Magic Mask, and we're going to plug this bright shot into the Magic Mask. And look at this. What I'm going to do is I'll just start kind of in the middle here, is I'm going to just draw over her places that I want to select like this. And that's going to kind of cut her out. And I want to draw on any place that I want to include and hold Alt and draw over things that I want to leave out. So that's pretty good. This edge doesn't have to be perfect because the nature of the rain is it's not going to have a perfect edge. She doesn't need to be cut out perfectly, which that's why Magic Mask is great for this, is because it doesn't really give you a perfect edge most of the time, but it's good enough for what we're doing. So we have this cut out. What you have to do with Magic Mask is once you get the cutout, you have to track it. The good thing is that the tracking is automatic. So you don't have to, track something with a planar tracker and then apply that movement or anything like that. All you need to do is go over here to this track forward and backward button and click on that. And what that's going to do is give you a reasonably good selection of her. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be some problems. Let's just see what it does by default. There we go. So it's selected her sort of decently. In the middle, it's pretty good. Like the last half of the shot isn't too bad. That's probably just fine. The beginning of the shot, there are some problems. For instance, we're cutting into her forehead here. Like her forehead is gone. So we have a couple options at this point. We're going to be using this to cut out our rain. And so we can either make this better or we can just not put the rain behind there. We kind of used that trick before. It would probably work fine for this, but I'll show you the right way to do it. Okay. I'm going to hit left and right bracket on my keyboard. That's kind of right above the return key. And I'm going to start in the middle where I was tracking, and I'm just going to go to the left, and I'm just looking for any problems with this selection. Okay. So as soon as I come across a problem that I think is kind of a big deal, right here where it's kind of cutting into her hair, that's where I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to draw over the part that I think should be included. Okay, I'd say something like that. We can always look at our original footage, make sure we're not missing anything major. We are missing her hair a little bit, but I don't think it's going to matter a whole lot. Once we do that, we're going to need to track some more because it's I'm basically telling it, I want the selection to look just like this right here. And then it has to think about it some more. So in between these two, it's going to be fine, just how we were. But on the left side of it, it's going to lose its mind. Okay. So right here, we're going to track this backwards and see how that does. Now it does a little better. It keeps her forehead here. And so for a while, things are pretty good. But then her other arm comes up and kind of cuts out this mask. Now that's not something we really want. So I'm going to wait until it's really in front of the window, which is going to be right about there. And let's go ahead and add that arm back in. I want to include all of that. Okay. And then again, we have to track this to the left. There we go. And so now it has a pretty good selection all the way through. There's a little bit of problems like right here. This is probably something we aren't going to notice too much. And so I'm just looking for a reasonably good selection of her. Depending on what you're doing, if you're doing something that is really essential, that you have a really good edge, you're going to have to work a lot harder on this. And you're probably going to have to adjust the edge manually yourself. But for this, it can be pretty quick and dirty. Now, right here where she's kind of moving her arm, that's where we have some problems with the selection, because right here we should see some rain. And if we don't fix this, we're not going to see rain there. Okay. So right about here, this looks good, but this next frame, we want to include her hand and we want to not include this part back here. Okay. Something more like that. And let's track that forward. See how that goes. It's reasonably fine. Let's include it here, include this stuff. Sure. Let's keep tracking. Okay. So now we have this selection of our girl. And now that we have this selected, we can use this for all kinds of stuff. What we've really built here is a matte. So if I go over here to alpha, we can see that we have a black and white image and it's animated. Look at this. So it brings us back to our elements of invisible VFX. Mattes and masks. While a mask is just kind of cutting something out, something that you draw or track, or both, like a path with the pen tool in general, or a shape that you put on the screen. A matte is kind of a larger term for just a selection. So a mask, when you trace this out, it makes a matte. So when I go around this with the pen tool, what I'm really doing is creating a matte that I can use for other things. And again, the matte is the black and white kind of image that is a map of where things should be on in the white and where it should be off in the black. In fact, if we were to draw a mask, bloop, 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 and then view it, look at this. Even if we don't have the alpha channel, this is making a matte. It's a black and white image, essentially. White is on and black is off. And so we can apply that to whatever we want to control its transparency or its strength. So with Magic Mask, even though we have this image that has color information, what we're really, really interested in is the alpha channel. That's the transparency channel of this image. Okay. This Magic Mask, we can adjust this matte by going over here to matte. And here we can do things like blur the matte and make it bigger or shrink it. So I'm going to just push the row dilate up a little bit and then blur this a little bit because we just don't want to see the rain on top of her. We're not so much interested in putting this image over the rain. We just don't want the rain where she is. So now that we have this selection, what I can do is combine this selection with our current mask and kind of use one to cut out the other. If I were just using masks, this is really easy because I could do something like grab a circle mask, an ellipse mask, and I can plug this polygon mask into the ellipse mask. And by default, they're going to add together. But if I select this ellipse mask, I can go to paint mode instead of merge, do something like subtract, and I can cut one mask out with another mask. Okay. But it doesn't really work that way with Magic Mask. This is essentially a new image with an alpha channel rather than a mask proper. So what we need to do is combine the matte that we make with this mask and the matte that we make with the alpha channel of this Magic Masked image. Whew, that's a lot. A great way to do that is with a node called Matte Control. So Matte Control is right here. And what this does is it takes mattes and it changes them and combines them and moves them around and adjusts them and everything. So anytime that you have a matte problem, a matte control is probably a pretty good bet to help fix the problem. So what we'll do is take our polygon and we'll plug this into the yellow input of the matte control. That's the main input. So what we have here when we just view our matte control is the result of whatever the matte control is doing. Right now, it's just taking that polygon mask and just pushing it through. But if we take this magic mask, we can plug this into the gray input, which is the garbage matte. Now check this out. When I garbage matte this, look what happens. Oh, baby. A garbage matte is typically a matte that masks out the garbage. Whatever you don't want to be in the selection, you make a shape and then you plug that into the garbage matte and it says, okay, don't include this into the selection. This is garbage. That's used a lot with green screen. So if you have a green screen that's not totally behind somebody, you can garbage matte out the sides and then just worry about keying the green that's actually there. And you don't worry about like the rest of your apartment, but it can also be used this way to just cut out something. Right now, we have this matte working, but actually we should take this planar transform and we should put this into the planar transform first because we want this window mask to move along with the footage. And we also want to cut out our lady, and we don't need to track that because the selection's already made, including that camera shake. So when we play this back, we'll see that we have the camera shake and we have her matted out like this, okay? So this is our matte. This is the transparency. This is where our rain is going to show up, everywhere where it's white. So we could take this and plug this into the merge for our rain. And look at this beauty. Look at this. It's crazy. It looks like it's back there. Isn't that nuts? Because we're putting that rain only where that mask needs to be. And it does a pretty dang good job. Okay. The one thing we'll do is this is maybe just a little bit sharp of a mask. So let's take this polygon mask. Let's open up our two things here and let's make sure these are both like at 400%, let's say. And let's just change the soft edge and just soften that a little bit, just so it's not super harsh. And that's probably going to be more realistic. And now we have our rain coming down. Oh, so good. So we have the rain where it's supposed to be and it's moving along how it's supposed to be. And so we're a lot of the way there. Let's take this rain and again, just do our color correction. Let's make this just a little bit more blue. And then let's do our lens blur just like we did before. Octagon, blade curvature up, anamorphism down. And then let's adjust this blur size to be whatever we need. It's going to be something like the blurs in the background here. So we want it something similar. Maybe not quite so much because it's not so far away, but we definitely want it blurrier than she is and then that our foreground is. So there's our rain and it's just super heavy rain. Okay. Now, anytime that you want something to look a little bit more natural, especially, I mean, with particles, with textures, with anything, it helps to add a little bit of randomness to it. So instead of having our rain be everywhere all at the same strength, what might be interesting is to make it a little bit stronger here and a little bit less strong here and kind of just like patch it in a little bit, which we can use with this same cloud generator here, this fast noise. Okay. Let's push up the detail a little bit, take the scale down, and I can take this contrast up a little bit. What that's going to do is make this really, really patchy. And look at this. Just like we were using our magic mask for a matte, we can use the alpha channel from this noise as a matte. So I can take this and just plug this into the mask input of rain. You don't even have to use a mask for the mask input. It's just going to look at the alpha channel, the transparency of whatever you plug into that. Blooch. Now we have this rain that isn't uniformly strong. We plug this in and it's a little bit stronger here and a little bit less strong here. And as we adjust this fast noise, the scale and everything, that's going to adjust how strong our rain is and kind of how randomly it shows up, because that's just more realistic. We can adjust the seethe where it should be stronger in some points. And that's also going to it's going to make this look more realistic. It's going to help it look natural, right? And now we have a lot more realistic rain. We could even push the seethe rate up so that it changes and it's a little bit stronger sometimes, and a little bit less strong some other times. Maybe I'll take that down a little bit. And that really, really helps. So what I like to do is make this look as good as I can at full strength, because if it's almost believable at full opacity, full strength, when I turn it down to be reasonable, it's going to look really, really good. Okay. So this is already looking pretty good. Like it's halfway believable at the moment. Okay. But now that we have this all set up, we can take this merge and take the blend down, and here's where the sauce comes in. I like to just take this down all the way and then bring it up to where I just start to notice it somewhere in there maybe. And when it's moving, you can even notice it a little more. And yeah, just turn it way down, way, way further down than you think you need to, because you're going to notice this kind of subconsciously. Bring this up a little bit more just so we can see it on YouTube. But you'll see it sort of subconsciously. And so now when we go to our color page and take a look at this, we'll see, we can see that it looks like it's pouring rain outside. And that helps so much. So there we have realistic rain added behind our girl, through the window, properly blurred, all of that stuff. It ends up looking really good. Okay, so let's kick this up a notch.
Kick it up a little bit.
5 minutes and 29 seconds. We have this shot right here of dead guy shot. Dead guy falls over here. Shabam. Just brighten this up a lot. So there's a problem with this shot. What we wanted to do was have blood kind of splatter across this window. What actually happened was this. We have the guy land, and then we just poured blood next to him, and it was really, really obvious. So we're going to fix this with compositing. And there's going to be two major jobs here. One is to erase this current blood that's not working. So we're going to get rid of this and just erase it, make it look like it's not there. The next job is to add some blood splatter that does look really good. So we're just fixing our mistakes. We are fixing it in post. And so let's think about this with our elements of invisible VFX. What are we going to need here? We're going to be doing some tracking. We're going to be working with sharpness. We're going to be matching colors. We're probably going to be making masks and maybe even a matte. We're going to be color matching. But one thing that we're going to have to start considering that we haven't yet is the concept of grain. We'll get into this more, but the simple idea is this. When you have video footage, really any kind of video footage at all, you're going to have some aspect of grain. And so if we zoom way in on this, we can see that there's these little dots, little pieces, and this is a still, but if we were to play it back, this grain would be dancing around. So it's sort of like static. And that's something, again, that is typical of all video footage. Some footage is a lot more grainy, some is a little bit less. The higher end Blackmagic cameras tend to have really pleasing, very, very fine grain, but there is grain nonetheless. Now, when you have a still image, that still will also have this grain in it, but it's not going to be dancing around because it's just one frame. And so anytime that you put a still over some moving footage, if you were to zoom in and if you were to color correct it a little bit, you could probably notice that the still doesn't have dancing grain and the footage does have dancing grain. And so a lot of the time with visual effects, what we'll do is we'll reduce the grain. We'll use some kind of plugin or utility to get rid of the grain so that we don't have the dancing grain with our video footage. We don't have the grain with our still, and we can put them together without it being just a dead giveaway. And then usually what we'll do is add some grain over everything at the end. This is a really subtle thing, but it gives a little bit of texture to our shots and doesn't make it look kind of plasticky, which is kind of how it looks when you reduce the grain. So even in this shot, if we were to zoom in here, you would notice that there's this dancing grain. So we can zoom way in here and you can really see it. That's what's going on. So at some point, we're going to have to deal with that for the main reason, because the way that we're going to erase this blood is by taking a still of this footage and kind of pasting this still over itself so that we have this kind of blank piece right here. We'll deal with that here in a few minutes, just so you know that's kind of coming up. But for now, let's kind of do the basic version of this. So again, I'm just going to take this brightness and contrast and leave it on here. Even though this isn't going to be this light, when we actually do our color, it's going to help us see what the heck is going on. And you know, we can always take it down. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so let's take this and let's just do our track. Let's do planar track like this. And where we're going to be working is right here. But if I play this back, notice there's kind of stuff in the way. And she's in the way part of the time too for this track. So what we want to do is track this without this blood kind of throwing it off. The good news is that we can probably start this track like right there when he settles down, because he settles down right before that blood comes in. I'm thinking we could probably use maybe this frame right here. And I'm just going to select the edge of the coat and the edge of this and maybe this part of his head, let's say. Heck, we can select all this stuff too, like that. So I'm selecting everything but right here, but in this region. We'll go over here to reference time and set that. For the motion type, it might be good to do perspective, but let's just try translation and rotation and just see how that goes. Could do translation and rotation scale, sure. And just track it forward from here. So we'll just track it like this, and we'll see how this goes. So it's moving a little bit. Some of this, I think, is from him moving his head. So that's not really going to work. So maybe we shouldn't track his head too much. Okay, so let's reset it. It's totally okay to just restart a couple times. Sometimes that's what it takes to get a good track. So we'll just select everything else. See how that goes. Set, track forward. I don't know about that one either. You see how this is kind of moving this little outline more than our shot is moving? It's maybe not going to work, but let's just check it. Let's go to steady and just see what that looks like. So it's kind of like jumping around a little bit, like right there. So that's probably not going to work. So what do we do about this? What do we do? Let's try our planar tracker one more time. And maybe we'll just track this part. See if this will help. So really what we want is just the main movement that the camera gives us. And really, let's see, we want this actually back a few frames. Let's just start it there. Set, go forward. I just can't find enough data. It's having a hard time. Yeah, so it's saying track append failed. For some reason, it doesn't like this. Now, what might help is if we just brighten this a little bit. Let's take this gain and turn it to like 10. Let's just reset this and try it again. Sure, right here. Set, translation, rotation, scale, go forward. Yep. So that helps a lot. Okay, that's pretty good. Sometimes you can just color correct it and it works a little better. So we just made this a lot brighter before we tracked it. Let's go back to steady. Let's see how this works. Psh, there we go. Okay, we're steadying it there. Now, I'm not worrying about tracking the beginning of this shot because we don't need anything at the beginning of this shot. This is where the blood fix has to happen, is just everything after 135. In fact, right here, actually at 135, I can set my in point at 135 for my work area, and I can zoom in here so that we're only working on this part of the shot. And that will just make it so we can loop through the part that we actually need. This doesn't actually set the in and the out of the clip, which is kind of confusing, right? Because generally setting something that looks like this in a viewer up here sets an in and out, but it doesn't set the in and the out. In fact, I think I called it the in and out just now, but it's actually the render start time and the render end time. That's just kind of the work area for what we're using right now. So this is working. So instead of steady, I'll go back to track and let's make a planar transform, and we can leave this bright for now. I'll close our page navigation though. And let's just see if we can do this the easy way. So here at the very beginning, right about there. Let's see if we can just take a still image of this and then just paste it over it like a patch. So to make a still of a video in Fusion, what we need to do is run this through a node called time speed. Time speed, you can do this a couple different ways, but time speed I think is the easiest one. So we can just take our original footage, which I'll just grab it from this brightness and contrast, this brighter footage. We can set the speed to 0, the interpolation mode to nearest, and then the delay to whatever frame we want to hold. So we're going to do this current frame, which is 139. We're going to set that right here for our delay. So this is 139. And what this will do now, if I view time speed, is this is going to be frame 139 the whole time. Okay, just going to be a still frame. So now we have a still frame of the original image. By the way, people get confused with this. This is exactly like doing this. It's taking a copy of this media, running it through time speed like this, a copy of itself, and then we're going to merge it over like that. That's the exact same thing. So this is the original footage. This is the original footage, brightness and contrast, time speed, right? But these are exactly the same. So I'm just going to take this output of brightness and contrast and bring it into my time speed. So we can just use this node for multiple things, just a little bit faster. So then at 139, frame 139, we're going to go to, frame 139. And let's grab our polygon mask and put this into our merge. And I'm just going to draw kind of a little triangle here like this. Let's just start with the triangle, something like that. And what that should be is this should be putting this still image over itself. In fact, it might be easier if I just like color correct this real quick. Make this pink. So what we have is the still image over the footage. Now, if I play this back, it's going to be a still image over the footage, but it's not moving along with it. That's because we haven't put our planar transform through this. So at frame 139, it's just easier to go there first. I can take this planar transform, hold shift, and then drop that in like that. I'm also going to do that for my mask. So I'll hit Control C, Control V, plug my mask into that yellow input, and then put the planar transform into that input right there. I'm also going to take this time to get rid of the shape animation on my mask. So now we should have this pink triangle kind of stuck to this. Yeah, like that. Good, good, good. We don't need this to be pink anymore because we'll be able to figure out what the heck is wrong. Let's just look at this on loop. Okay, so now the question is, what's wrong here? What is not invisible about this visual effect? There's a few things. This is not good work so far.
Strange. That usually works.
So one thing is the movement actually works pretty well. We don't have any kind of mismatch really over here. I think overall things are pretty good there. And I think a lot of these problems are going to be fixed just by adjusting this mask. So I'm just going to select this polygon mask. And can we get away with just going to like here? This looks like it's going to have to be over some more, like that. And I bet this one we can get away with not quite going all the way over here either. Something like that. Let's play this through. Ooh, okay. So right here, we see the little bit of blood kind of coming through right there. So if I turn this off, there's that blood stream. So this is going to have to cover the blood. So let's make sure that's over that. Kind of keep going this way. I don't know how far the blood goes. Boom. So that's the first time we see it right there. So really, we could make this more like this. Okay. Let's turn our merge back on. Let's see how this works. Let's take a look. Okay, so we have that patch over everything, and it sort of looks fine, I guess. It's not great. But we actually don't need this until the blood starts, which is right there at 140. So here at 140, that's when we're actually going to turn this on. So let's take this merge, turn the blend totally on at 140, and then at 139. I guess it can be on at 139, but let's turn it off. So now it starts totally fine, and then it still frames right there. Now, this might be one of the cases where we actually would want to animate this mask. So let's right click here for shape animation. And let's just make sure this is covering where we're supposed to cover it. Let's go. And I think I'll take this back a little bit because we don't need it on his hair yet. And let's go forward a few frames and we'll make sure this is right. Let's figure out where this blood really needs to be. Something like that. There we have this little bit, so we'll cover that up. Okay. The one thing we might need to do is use our transform, put a transform after our time speed, and just move this around to kind of align it with his head a little bit. Maybe not. Okay. This is patching this, and it's fine. It's not great, but here's the good news. We have a couple tricks up our sleeve to deal with this not being that great. One is we could take this soft edge up a little bit. That's just going to blend this a little bit. Okay. And the idea is to make this less noticeable when we're zoomed in here. There's a little bit of the blood happening right there. Let's take this up a little bit. Okay. Once this is like not offensive, not like totally offensive, then we're probably home free on this. Now, you could take a lot of time and make this a little bit better and adjust it and everything. But the truth is this is going to be a lot darker and there's going to be blood over this. And so it doesn't have to be like perfect. I love stuff like this where you don't have to work so hard. So that's pretty good. And if we can zoom out a little bit and it's like sort of fine, we should be okay. One thing, like I was saying, is that we have this dancing grain where if we were to look at this, you know, in one of our other channels here, you can see there's a lot of grain here and it's not dancing here with this still. That is happening. Again, it might not be something you notice because we're going to put blood over it, but it's easy enough to fix. And this is definitely helpful for times when you might notice it more. What we want to do is reduce our noise. And so I like to use a plugin called Reduce Noise. And this is a third-party plugin. This doesn't come with Resolve, but this is from Neat Video. And Neat Video, just look at that. It's so easy. What you do is you select a part that has noise. And ideally, it's a part that is uniform. There we go. And it kind of samples the noise. You hit Build Profile and hit Apply. And what it will do is get rid of that dancing noise. Look at that. So here's before. Here's before. Here's after. Isn't that nuts? You can reduce noise in Fusion and in Resolve with the built-in stuff that they have, but this is really, really easy. I mean, it takes 2 seconds and it does an amazing job. And so that's kind of what I normally like to use. And then now check this out. Now, even if we go to the blue channel here, we don't have as big of a difference with that dancing noise. Isn't that cool? Super helpful to match that noise. So now that we have all the noise off of this, generally you want to add noise on it afterwards too. There's a bunch of ways to do that. One way that you can do that is just type in grain and you can change this grain size and power and all that stuff and just add some kind of, add a little bit of softness. You can add that dancing grain back in and kind of regrain things. Take the power down a little bit. So again, I know this is horrible. Okay, this isn't that great, but we're going to fix this a little bit. So how do we fix it? Well, one thing we can do is just cover it. Just so cheaply, just such a hack move. Cover it with blood. Let's take this blood splatter. This is from our Action VFX buddies. And let's just merge it on top. Look, there's our blood. And I'll hit XF for transform. And let's just bring that over here like this. There we go. There's a little bit of blood splatter. So cool. Blood. Okay. Just have some blood like that. That's going to cover a lot of problems. In fact, we'll just put this right over the problems. Okay. If you don't want to take some time and make it look really great, just put it over the problems. Just patch it over. Just put a newspaper over the vomit and you're good. You're good. Let's take our planar transform, copy and paste that in there so that it sticks with our footage. And let's see how this looks. There's our still, looks good, but we want this to animate on when he falls down. So let's zoom out our work area a little bit, move this back, because we want right when this body falls, boom, right there to be where the blood happens, right about there, about 135 or so. Now, this blood is animated, and so if we go to our keyframes panel and zoom to fit, let's rename this so we aren't just guessing. Call this blood underscore MI. We want to find blood MI. There it is, right there. And let's just push this to the right like this. And I'm looking up here to look when that blood kind of animates on. There we go. So that's about the time when we want this to happen, somewhere in there. Sure. So now, bloosh. Oh man. Shlu. I'd say maybe it should happen a little bit faster. I'm just kind of moving this back and forth like I would just in the edit page. Oh gosh, so crazy. All right, great. There's a whole bunch of blood. And what's great about blood on glass, this is kind of just worked out really well for us, is that we can set this merge to multiply. So if we go to apply mode, multiply, that's going to do a pretty good job of making blood on the glass. The only thing left to do is to mask this so that it actually shows up decently. So we'll just add a mask. We'll put that through a planar transform. I'm going to turn off the animation for our mask. And we're going to mask this to be just within the window like this. Sure. Okay, so now, oops, I have this. See, it almost got me. This polygon needs to be in the yellow. There we go. And now we have that masked so it isn't shooting blood inside the car magically. Okay, let's see how this looks. Sploosh. Yep. So even though we did a terrible job of putting that patch in, it looks fine. Bloosh. Cool. So this looks pretty good. Let's go back to our
elements of invisible VFX.
We got the tracking. We got the grain. We did our mask. We don't need a matte. Our perspective seems like that's probably going to be fine. We do need to check our sharpness and our color matching. Our color management should be good too. So sharpness and color matching. Question is, do these colors look good? We're going to have to kind of change how we did our brightness and contrast here to check that. But let's check the sharpness here. I think I'll just add a lens blur to this. Blur size, let's take that down a little bit. The only bad part about lens blur is that it doesn't really affect it under a certain amount. I think it's 1. There it goes. So we could take that down just a little bit and kind of make that a little less sharp. That's going to help a little bit, just kind of blend that with things. So I think that's pretty good for our sharpness. Now let's see if our colors match here. I'm going to take this brightness and contrast and just hold shift and drag this out, because what we're really doing is we're compositing on this darker image and then we're going to brighten it up in color. But let's see what this looks like when it's brighter, just by attaching the brightness and contrast after the media out. One thing that's happening is we're boosting this grain a lot. So we don't want to do that. That just makes it look terrible. You notice that difference between when we color graded this, when we did our brightness and contrast before everything versus after? It's pretty wild. If we take this grain out, that shouldn't be that big of a deal. Yeah. Okay. So let's take this grain just way down. Way down. And now this brightness and contrast, this is way brighter than we're actually going to want it. So let's just take this down to something reasonable. Make sure this is going to be like sort of what we want. Because I'm thinking it's going to be more along the lines of that when we color grade it. Yeah. And the thing is, if you can look at this darker and lighter, and if it's kind of within this range of like, if I push it way lighter, it still looks good. If it's darker, kind of medium dark, it still looks good. If it looks good at all these different exposures, it's probably going to be just fine when you color grade it. I think that's going to work great. We'll just keep it bright so we can actually see what's going on. So yeah, now we have this super gory shot and we fixed the problem. Isn't that awesome? This one's maybe a little bit less invisible because it's kind of in your face blood. Maybe one thing I might do is just take this blood and take some brightness and contrast. Make sure to clip my black and white and select my pre-divide post-multiply and just take the gain down just a touch. Just so this is a little bit darker red. That might be a little more realistic. Yeah. So there we go. We're erasing the bad blood that isn't that great and replacing it with the great blood. All right, so we've learned a lot about making invisible effects. Let's dive into a little bit more challenging of a shot. So this is going to be our final project, and there's a lot to this one. And so this would be a great time to pause and kind of go back and practice stuff if you've been having a hard time with it, because I am going to be moving a little bit faster because there's a lot to this one, okay? But it's going to be really fun. At the very end of our timeline here, we have a couple of shots. So at like 7 minutes and 4 seconds and 7 minutes and 9 seconds, we have two shots here. We have one of our monster running out into the road. And then we have this shot of our rear view mirror. The idea here is that we want to put this shot into the rear view mirror because this is a POV. This is her looking up at the mirror, and what she sees in the mirror is the reflection of this boy, this handsome fellow just roaring. So how do we do something like that, combining these two shots? This is going to be tricky. Let's take these clips first of all, and I'll just unlock these and just stack them. Okay, we're just going to stack them together. So I have this one on top, this one on the bottom. You can have them switched, it doesn't matter. I'm going to select both of these, right click, and say New Fusion Clip, like this. That's going to bring those both into a Fusion clip from our timeline. Switch over to Fusion. And here we have this one, and it has kind of put this together. Now, I like to get rid of most of this. I'm just going to grab both of these, hold shift and drag out, and then get rid of this because it just adds more complexity than it needs to. Let's rename this one. This is our mirror MI for media in. This is our monster MI. Turn off our page navigation here. I'll take the mirror and plug this into our media out and view our media out. So here's our mirror. And the basic idea is that we want this reflection to be in the mirror here. So if you've been paying attention, you can probably guess the general tactics that we're going to use to make that happen. First of all, let's just look at the shot. The shot is moving. It's not just a static shot. There is some camera shake there. So we're going to have to do some kind of tracking. And then we're also going to need to cut out where this mirror is and use some kind of mask to limit where we put the reflection image. But just to mock this up with a still, it's going to be, something along these lines where we have this kind of thing going on. Like this, but actually looks good and is better. Keeping in mind
the elements of invisible visual effects.
So let's start with tracking. I'll just go ahead and disconnect this for now. Let's track our mirror. Again, I'm going to brighten this up first, just because that's going to help with our track and it's going to help us see what the heck is going on. I'll just push up the gain and the gamma a little bit, just so we can see like where the edge of the mirror is and all of that. This isn't how we're going to color grade it. It's just bringing up the levels so that we can work on this really dark shot. Then let's do planar tracker. And we'll just select the area that we want to track, which is going to be this mirror We generally want to keep the high contrast areas so that we can track their motion, but we don't want too much of the windshield wipers that are going behind it. So let's not track a bunch of those. Yeah, something like that. For motion type, let's do translation, rotation, scale, set our reference time, and then track forward, go, and then track backward. And let's just see how this works. Let's go to operation mode and set that to steady. And let's look at this. Oops, we actually need to view the planar tracker. Okay. So we're tracking this and it's staying in the middle of the shot, which is what we want. But we have some unfortunate business here. This was shot with a camera that had to be really compact. So we didn't have, a big shoulder rig or anything like that. It was basically just the camera held in hands. And so what happens when you do that is sometimes, because of the way that the shutter works on the camera, when you shake it, it can kind of warp the image a little bit. What happens is, even though we're steadying this image, we still see this kind of warping a little bit. So you can kind of see this moving around. This isn't because the track is off. It's because the image itself is actually kind of going whir, 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 like that. So we have a couple things that we can try. Let's go back to track, and I'm just going to save this planar tracker for a minute, but let's make another planar tracker, and we're going to do a similar thing and just select this here. But this time, instead of motion type, translation, rotation, scale, we're going to say perspective. Hit set and track this forward, and then go track it backward. And let's see if that helps at all. Let's do steady. No, it's not helping at all. In fact, it actually makes it a little bit worse, because when you use the perspective, that's a great way to track something that's kind of moving in 3D space like this, something like a door or a license plate or something that's kind of needs to be corner pinned sort of. But this isn't exactly like that. It's more, it's like the whole image is kind of wobbling. And so it's actually throwing this off a lot, and it's kind of overcompensating, and that's why it's just wacky pants. So this other planar tracker has actually done a little bit better job, even though it's a more simple track, but we still have this kind of weirdness. So what are we to do? Well, one thing that we could do would be to use something like a surface tracker. The surface tracker is made for stuff that kind of warps like this. So let's just see how great this is. I'm just going to track this with the surface tracker. Just selecting it, and it's a lot like the planar tracker, except for it assumes there's going to be some wonkiness. So I just made this boundary, go to mesh, and it's going to calculate this mesh. Go to track and just hit track back and forth. And let's see how it works. By the way, this effect is only available in the paid version of Resolve. It's only in the studio version. And so what we're doing is we're tracking this with this kind of fancy tracker. And we'll see how it does. Okay, let's go over here to the result. And what that's going to want is something to warp onto it. So let's just make some text. Mirror like this. We'll just put this in the mirror like this, just to mock up something, see how it moves. And it's not awful. It's not awful, but look at this. It's kind of dancing around. It's getting crazy. So that's not really even going to work either. And we could mess with this and try and make it a little better. There's probably things that you can do to adjust this if we want to, but really all we need is just a solid matte on this mirror. We need a solid shape of what should be in the mirror and a solid movement along with it. So we're going to do a little shortcut. We're going to kind of cheat a little bit. So I'm going to get rid of this text and the surface tracker, and let's use this normal planar tracker, which is doing a relatively decent job of just stabilizing this footage. Let's go back to track and just make a planar transform from that. Okay, take this out. And this time, if we were to put some text over this, we could run that through the planar transform, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Even though there is that tweaking a little bit, it does a pretty good job. Okay. Now, this isn't going to be as great when we're trying to really stick on the edges of this thing and we want to have kind of a perfect mask around where the mirror is. It's good enough for this text just to stick the text to, but once we actually have a real matte on this, it's probably not going to work very well just because it's moving like that. So what we're going to do is instead of putting text over this, we're going to take a still image of this mirror. And so we're going to do time speed just like we did before. And let's plug this into time speed right here. And we'll use frame 5, sure. So speed 0, delay is 5, interpolation mode is nearest. So now this is going to stay at frame 5 the whole time. We're going to put this into our planar transform. And now we have this same motion that we had, but we have the still image kind of pasted over it and moving with that same motion. Let's cut this out, which we can do with a matte control. We could also copy and paste this and kind of cut it out that way. It doesn't really matter, but I like to do a matte control after this time speed like this. And we'll connect a mask to the gray input, the garbage mask. And I'll just do something really quick to start out with. Then we can go back and change this a little bit once we like it. By default, it's going to be the opposite of what we want. And so let's just invert this mask and then feather it out a little bit with this soft edge. And now we can put this over our original footage with something like a transform. So we'll do a transform after this matte control. So what we're doing is we're taking our original footage, which we happen to be brightening temporarily for now. We're freeze framing it here. We're cutting it out with this matte control. Then we're transforming it. And so I'm just going to size this up a little bit just so it is easy to cover the original footage like this. And if we size it up just a touch, nobody's ever going to know or care. Just like that. This is maybe just a little too soft. We'll see. Okay. And now we have a pretty good image here that is moving in a realistic way, but without the weirdness. The only problem is, of course, that we don't have the dancing grain on here, which we already know how to deal with. So we'll do that in a little bit. Okay. We'll deal with the grain. Let's just make sure that our mask is good. I'm just going to kind of adjust this to be just right. We want all our masks to be Goldilocks. Not too big or not too small, but just right. I'll hit Shift S to kind of smooth that out a little bit. Something like that. And then when we put this over it, it should just be no problem mixing. Cool. We can compare this with the original. This is the original without any comp, and this is our new one. Just a little bit bigger. Again, nobody's ever going to know. We're going to get away with this secret. No problem. Okay, and it looks pretty good. Works pretty well. So we have our movement set up, and if it didn't have that Jello cam, we wouldn't need to do this extra step. We could just track it. But now we have this movement that we can trust. Let's go ahead and make our mask for the inside of this mirror. Okay. And I'm going to do something that we haven't done yet. I'm just going to take a background and maybe turn this red and then put the mask right on this background. And let's run this through a copy of our planar transform and then merge this over everything. And when the mask isn't on there, this is going to make this just red. But with the mask on there, sometimes the planar transform gets frustrated that you have a mask on there, but there's no actual path for the masks. But once I draw a path and close it, it's going to show me what's going on. For now, I'll just turn off the planar transform and let's do a nice mask around here. And I'm just trying to match it to the edges of this mirror. There we go. Yeah. I'll turn on the planar transform because that's going to offset this a little bit, but it's going to be less grumpy now. So we'll move this around until it's just right. And I can take this merge and just turn the blend all the way down. I can more easily see what I'm doing here. So I want this to be right on that edge. Just take some time and get this pretty darn great looking. There we go. Shift L to linearize that. Shift L here to make that a little bit harsher. And it sometimes just helps to go around and just double check everything. So we want this to be a really nice matte. Okay, we have our mask there. Can turn this blend back on for our merge. So now we have this red matte. And it makes it a little bit easier for us to see when there's like weird looking problems and stuff like this. You can kind of see the shape of it a little better than we can just with the mask. Like this looks weird, right? So it's hard to tell with this kind of low light shot. Yeah, something like that. Let's take this soft edge and push this up. And this is really the advantage of doing your mask on a background like this instead of just masking whatever you're going to mask, is when you have this really high contrast, really bright shape, then you can tell problems a little bit easier. It's less forgiving. And if you can get it to look decent like this, then it'll look really good when you actually use this to mask the real thing. So now we have this really nice mask for the inside of our mirror that perfectly follows our mirror. That's great. So we can leave this here if we want to. It's not going to hurt anything. We can always just turn this merge off. But what we want to do is put this monster over our mirror. And let's use this mirror matte to mask our merge. And we'll take this monster and we'll add a transform. And we'll scale this down. We'll just scale it down too much at first. And then we'll just fill up the mirror as much as we can. So now we have the monster kind of coming in to the mirror. See what we're doing? Oh, baby. So yeah, it's kind of a thing. We can kind of see what's going on here. This isn't great. There are a few problems. One of them being, edge of this might be just a little bit too soft. So we'll take this soft edge down just a little bit. We want it to match with the softness here. We want those to be the same. So I think that's more accurate. Okay. The other thing is our grain is all messed up. We should have grain over this. We shouldn't have still grain here versus dancing grain here. All of that's messed up. We'll deal with that later. But this is still kind of shaking. That's because we don't have our planar transform attached to our reflection here. So let's grab our planar transform, copy, paste. There we go. So that's going to fix a little bit of it. Also, especially like right there, you notice that not only do we have the shaking of this camera, but we also have the shaking of the other camera. So if we were to just look at this, notice that this camera is also a little bit shaky. So if we really want to match the movement of this original shot, we're going to have to pick one or the other. We can't have two shaky cameras and everything. There is a little bit of difference, just because of parallax and stuff for this. And so it almost works, but we really need to stabilize this shot first. So how do we stabilize it? Well, again, we can use our good old friend, the planar tracker. And I'm going to track something. I'm looking to track something that is constantly in the shot, that doesn't have stuff coming over it. So basically, everything here has the monster walking into it. So we're going to have to pick stuff over here, maybe down here, here to track. So let's just do that. I'm going to select all of this stuff like this, set, and let's just do translation and rotation, because we don't want scale, because we're moving away from the monster and we do want to keep that kind of movement, but we don't want it to be shaking while we do it. So let's do that and then track it forward, go track it backward. And I don't know, let's just see how it works. Steady, steady. See how that steady worked. It's a lot steadier. It's pretty good. So if we zoom in and we don't see all the edges, we should see pretty steady shot. Okay, so we're just going to keep that steady and put that into the rear view mirror here. Make sure that our transform is not revealing edges like we have right here. See this edge? So what we'll have to do is maybe scale this up, move it over a little bit. When you stabilize stuff, you often have to scale it up, change it around a little bit. Okay. Let's just kind of go through here, and we're looking for any edges that are kind of peeking in anywhere in this frame. Go through here. So we have what looks like an edge here, but it's actually not. It's a flare. That's not an edge. Crazy. And a good way to do that is just to look, right here while we scrub through. Look up at the top while we scrub through. I think it's fine. Look on the right when we scrub through. Seems fine. Look at the bottom. That all seems good. So it looks like we're pretty well framed for this. Anytime that you're doing something like this where you really want something to look real, you want it to look realistic, you have to think about the details. You have to think about the context, right? Just like we were talking about how a shot might look good, except for there's no rain, which is a problem when it's been raining the whole time. If you were to look in the rear view mirror of the car that we were in, you wouldn't see just this kind of zoomed in shot of our monster. You would see the back seats. And so what do we do about that? Oh no, that's going to be a problem. Well, luckily in our VFX assets, we have an image here that is just the back seats of this car taken from the perspective of the rear view mirror. And so this is more what it's going to look like, and we would see the monster out here outside of this window. So what we can do is we can get rid of this window, color correct this to look like it's at night, and then kind of paste it in front of the monster so that it looks like the monster is actually outside of the back window and not just magically, perfectly cinematically pasted in this rear view mirror. All of this stuff that we've been doing with our monster, this can all stay like that. Let's just move this up just so we have a little bit of space here to work. This is going to be our very background. So I'm going to start kind of building this to left to right, and we're going to merge this image over it. We're going to call this back seats and glass. The back seats and glass. Let's merge this over like this. We'll bring this up. Let's do a transform. I change the sizing of this, and we're going to want something that looks maybe more like that. Let's adjust the rotation. There we go. That looks pretty good. So now let's just see what this looks like in our rear view mirror. So now as we look through our rear view mirror, we have our back glass. Let's just take this transform and let's just view this by itself, and then also view it on the right here, the right hand side with our rear view mirror. Take this transform and kind of just move this around to where this looks good in our rear view mirror. In fact, I'm going to actually take this transform and move it back here because I want to adjust our guy behind this window once we cut that out. So what we really need to do is put another transform here that's going to adjust the framing of this within the mirror. Let's take the size down somewhere like that. Okay. So now we just have a little bit of the back seats in there. So it actually looks like we're looking outside of the mirror. Okay. So now if we play this back, this is going to look kind of unnatural, but it looks like this could possibly in a million years be an actual reflection of the back glass, right? One thing we'll need to do is cut out this back window, which we can do a bunch of different ways. But what I'm going to do is just put a mask directly on it. So let's take this and just drag it right into here. So we're working with the full res image, and I'm going to grab a polygon and attach it right to that image, but turn the polygon off. That's going to not get rid of the polygon while I'm drawing it, but it's still going to let me draw this mask as it's sized to this resolution, 4000 by 3000, okay? When you connect a mask, it stretches to the resolution of whatever you have it connected to. So it's good to draw your mask with whatever you're masking just isolated in that viewer, okay? So I'm also going to turn off that animation. Then I'm going to zoom in here and let's just do a pretty good job the first time. Pretty careful here. Something like that. And we'll just kind of go around the seats like this. This is the kind of thing you put on a good podcast, you know, listen to some music, and just do a good job. Okay. We'll just adjust this a little bit. Go around and make sure everything looks pretty good. Get rid of anything that's extra. I think that's going to be a pretty nice mask. This one's crazy. There we go. That's the nice thing about a mask. You don't have to get it perfect the first time. You can just get it close and then come back and adjust it later. This again, we're going to kind of get diminishing returns here of how crazy do we want to get and how much anyone will ever notice. We're probably past that point now. Okay. So now let's turn on our mask and then invert it. And that's going to cut out our back glass. Let's make sure that that's at least as soft as the edges here. So let's just soften it a little bit. Okay. So now we look at the back glass and we have our monster. Oh, baby, it's happening. So cool. We can probably move this monster over and then zoom it out a little bit too. There we go. There's our boy. There's our handsome man just doing his growling. The other thing we want to do is there are these lines. If we look at this back glass without the polygon on it, you see there's these lines that go across. And so I'd like to put those back in because those are realistic. That's just going to help sell it a little bit. Rather than try and mask all these or something, we're just going to kind of redraw them real quick. So let's do just a version of that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we're going to put that behind this back glass and in front of our monster. And let's just make this with shapes. So I'm just going to say S rectangle and S render. I can take this and merge this over. By default, it's going to make a white rectangle. And let's view these together. And let's make the rectangle a little bit wider, but very, very short in height. Just almost nothing. So not at 0, but just a little bit, like 1 pixel. Okay, there's our line. Let's make this black. So I'll just take these sliders down. And because these are shapes, we can add filters to this. So I'm just going to take this way up like this. And then let's do an S duplicate and add a couple copies here and then push a Y offset. And you can see what we're making here. See what we're doing. I'll just hold Control so that I can move this Y offset to be a little bit smaller. Push up some more copies. Let's do like 20, sure. And then we'll move these closer together. So now we have the lines on this back glass or something like it. Look at that. Oh, that's so cool. So we just kind of recreated those lines and it really starts to make it look nice. Isn't that neat? Another big problem. Back to our
Elements of invisible VFX.
we've done our tracking stuff. Oh, baby, we're so good with the tracking. The perspective is looking better, for sure. We got our masks and our mats. Oh, baby, we're going to deal with grain in a little bit, I promise. But we have some color matching to do because these colors are all jacked up. Look at this. It's wild. We got bright foreground, dark background, sunlight in the middle. What is this?
The crap is this?
Let's go ahead and start by just taking our brightness and contrast off of here so we can see that this is actually just a dark shot. And for our back seats and stuff, let's take this and add a color corrector to it just for our back seats. And we're going to make sure that we go over to options and click pre-divide post multiply. That's going to make sure that when we do our color correction, that it doesn't color correct the whole thing willy-nilly. It just color corrects it where it's opaque. So it's not going to color correct back in here and do weird things to our image. Okay, so if that ever happens, basically if you ever have any problems with color correction, brightness and contrast, curves, that kind of stuff in Fusion, it's because of this. It's because of pre-divide post multiply. Make sure to check that. Okay, so this color corrector, we're just going to get this in the ballpark. I'm just going to take this and just push it towards blue. We're going to actually make sure that we look at the color corrector here. Oh my goodness. Yes, that's going to help. Probably take our gain down a little bit. Maybe take our gamma down a lot. So this looks more like nighttime. There we go. And let's look at this in the context of what we're doing here. Oh, baby, look at that. Oh, that's so much better. This is before and this is after. It goes from way in your face, and this is obviously stupid, to, yeah, I believe that. Yeah, maybe so. That actually looks pretty good. I'm not too worried about that. So let's go with that for now. Also, might want to adjust the brightness of our monster here. So let's just do that after our initial monster. And let's just do brightness and contrast. Again, let's clip black and white, pre-divide, post-multiply. Let's take this gain down a little bit, just to, maybe the gamma down a little bit, just to darken that a little bit so that it doesn't look so bright and in your face. Because that's going to be in your face enough. Yes. Oh, that looks so sick. Look at that. That's so cool. Okay, cool. Again, we're going to deal with grain. We did our color matching. That's a little bit better. Color management's taken care of. Sharpness. So all of this is dependent on what is the actual focus of our original shot. So as we play this back, what's in focus? And pretty much everything here is in focus, but it wouldn't be if we were looking at our background here. So let's do some trickiness. I'm going to grab a lens blur. And what we want to do is blur all of this stuff and keep this stuff in focus. To blur everything that we've done so far, we could just take this lens blur and put this right here. Bloop. And look what happens. If we push this blur size up, that's going to blur everything except for the reflection. But there's a problem. The one thing that's not going to be blurred is the actual edges of our matte here. That's going to stay sharper. And that's because this matte, again, is separate. So what we could do is take this lens blur and let's copy this lens blur, but we're going to do something really tricky here. I'm going to click off and hit Control-Shift-V. That's going to make an instance. An instance is like a copy of a node, but it has its properties linked. And so you can put this multiple different places in your node graph here, and you can adjust one and it adjusts the other one, and vice versa. So if we want to add blur to everything here, as well as this red matte, we can take this and just run this through this blur and plug this into both the merge that we use sometimes and the mask for this merge 3. So now, look at this fanciness. As we blur this, it's going to blur the edges of this matte as well. Oh boy, so cool. Here, let's brighten this up so you can see it a little better. So we're going from, look at that. Oh, it's so cool. Okay, let's work on our actual blur here. We don't want this to be hexagon. We want it to be octagon. We want the blade curvature to be all the way up. We want the anamorphism to be 0.667. There we go. So that's going to look like our actual lens. So let's take this blur size down a little bit, and we're just going to do this a little more subtly, something like that. Just take this brightness and contrast down a little bit so we can see this just a little better. So we have a little bit of blur in our foreground, which is great. If we're focusing on the monster though, this stuff here should be a little blurry too. So let's do kind of a similar thing. I'm just going to copy this lens blur, paste here, and then hit Shift for our back seats. This, and then we'll just take this blur size down. We'll just push it up a touch. We also want the same blur to be on these lines. So I could either merge these lines first, or I could do the same thing, copy and Control-Shift-V, put an instance of the lens blur on this. Either one works fine, doesn't really matter. So now we can add a little bit of blur here, just so we have a little bit of depth, okay? Maybe these lines are a little bit strong. I could take the merge, the blend down on the merge a little bit. That might be a little bit more realistic. There we go. And we can leave it just like that. The other thing we could do would be to animate a focus rack, which I think is what we did in the real film. And the way that you would do that is just animate this lens blur. So we could just call this mid-ground blur. And then this one will be foreground blur. And we could also have another blur. We'll just copy and paste this on our very background. We'll call this BG blur. Okay, so we have these 3 blurs that we can animate together. And so let's just say we start with it really blurry. Let's just say a 4. Okay, animate that at 0, and then at 35, let's say this is in focus. Okay, so we have 2 places in time, 0 and 35. At 0, our midground blur should be pretty darn blurry. So we're going to make this maybe not quite as blurry as 4, but still pretty darn blurry. So 2.9, let's say. We'll add a keyframe. And then at 35, we're going to set this back to where it's just a little blurry. And then same thing for our foreground blur. At 35, this is going to be pretty darn blurry. So somewhere in here. Great. And then at 0, it's going to be less blurry. So now we have this rack. We rack focus. Look at that. A rack focus. So cool. So we go from in focus on the foreground to focusing on the background. Ah, I love stuff like this. So we've dealt with our tracking, our perspective, our sharpness, our color management, our color matching, our masks and mattes. Let's get to the grain. This is honestly a pretty easy part. So I'm going to take my mirror media in, and again, reduce noise and prepare noise profile like this. And let's just grab a piece from this mirror. Looks good. Build profile, apply. And now we can see with our brightness and contrast here, this is with the reduced noise on, this is with it off. So now we're just taking that noise off of everything. Looks pretty good. Take this brightness and contrast off. And then we're going to, again, just add grain. You can do this a bunch of different ways too. You can use grain from your camera that you shoot. There's ways to shoot the grain and then kind of put that back over, which is what we did for the movie. But if you have questions on that, I'll do a big tutorial on how to do that because I'd like to dive into doing that better myself. So let's take the size down a lot. Let's take the softness up a little bit. Take the power down a lot. I'm just going to push that up until it's sort of noticeable. Okay, looks good. So here's without the grain, here's with it. Just take this gamma up a little bit just to show you. No grain, with the grain. Yeah, really helps a lot. So now we have our finished shot. And dang, it looks pretty sick. Pretty sick. Oh, man. One thing I like to do, because sometimes Fusion has a hard time playing stuff back, is just go to my edit page and make sure that I have, under playback, I have render cache set to smart or user. I can just do user. And what that'll do is anything that it can't play back in real time, it's going to think about and write a cache. So it's just going to basically save kind of a render to disk so that it can just play it back like a normal movie. And it just kind of keeps that off to the side so that you can actually look at things in real time. So by default, if you stop touching Resolve for a little bit, it's going to go through and render those things. So I'll just wait for this to cache and then we'll take a look. All right, so this little line is blue. And now we have a pretty sweet shot, man. Oh, it's so cool. The last little thing I want to do, there's a couple things that we can do here. One is we can add more rain. You can always add more rain. The other thing we could do is add a little bit of smudges and kind of surface stuff with this mirror. So this is really going to sell it. So let's go back to our Fusion page. And I'm going to grab just any texture. So I'll grab this grunge dark texture that we've included in the files. This is just a dark kind of pavement texture. And what we're going to do is put this over everything except for the grain, like this. We're going to use the same matte as for our reflection. All right. But we're going to add a brightness and contrast here. And I'm going to clip black and white and pre-divide post multiply. And let's just bring this up here in the left viewer. And what I want to do is mess with these low and high thresholds to where we get kind of just some scratches like that. Yeah, something like that. Maybe we'll take a transform and we'll size this up and turn it a little bit just so we see a little bit of scratches on this thing. We can kind of add some schmutz to the mirror. And let's take this merge and we'll go here to apply mode and switch this to screen. And now we have some schmutz on the mirror. And again, we can use this same foreground blur. Just grab this foreground blur, copy, Control-Shift-V to place an instance, and we'll put this right here. We need our planar transform too. Let's do that. And now we have that kind of grunge on this mirror. Isn't that sweet? That really helps. Now, it doesn't look super great here, so let's just turn it down. Let's take the blend and just push it up just so you can barely even see it. Just so there's a little bit, it almost looks like dust on the mirror. Look at that. Just a little bit of dust. And as we play it back, it blurs out. Oh, it's so cool. So here's the dust. Then it blurs out. Oh, I love that stuff so much. Sometimes the guys make fun of me because I put grunge on like everything.
It's true. All of it.
But it's because it makes it look good. It's just an easy hack to make things look awesome. Okay, so there's some grunge on there. That's cool. Let's do one other little fancy cool thing. This mirror has this little overlay thing here. And so we could put that over it too. So how do we do that? Well, very similarly, let's just grab a matte control and we'll take this time speed, plug it into the matte control here. So now we have just this still image. And we can use this matte control to cut this out with a mask. So let's just use this ellipse mask. And we'll just put this right over here, invert the mask. So we're just grabbing this little part. And then we can put this through a instance of the foreground blur and a planar transform. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Now let's take a look at this. It should move and blur and everything just how we want it to. But let's take this merge and turn this to screen. Boop. And that's going to add that as kind of like an overlay in our mirror. It looks so good. And I don't even have to do anything. That really sells it. It looks like it's in the mirror. Isn't that sweet? Gosh dang it. I love this stuff. So now we have that with the direction overlay. Oh, looks so good. And of course we can add rain. So let's just add some rain. Let's go back to our Action VFX stuff. We have this wide rain. Let's put this in front of our transform, but before our blur, like that. There's our rain. There's enough. There's enough rain. Size that down. Bring this up like this. And again, we'll just screen that. That's probably way too much. We can take the blend down a lot. Just do it a little bit. Bring this up until it's like sort of noticeable. There's our rain. So cool. I feel like the rain's maybe just a little small. So let's size up the rain a little bit. Bring it up. There we go. Take this blend down to about half what it was. So we have that really subtle rain, so we can still see it if you're looking for it. But it's not totally overpowering. Yeah, that looks sick. So that's our big comp. Ugh. Should be proud. Should be proud of this. This is so neat. All right. I hope you've had as much fun as I have during this course. I hope you've learned a ton about invisible visual effects, and I really want you to download this footage and try this for yourself. That's how you learn, okay? So click on that link in the description, or you can click right here. Here's a little convenient, big old button thing for you. And yeah, that would be great. If you like this and you watched all the way to the end, please let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear from you. Okay? Thanks.